It's the pre-scoping for the St. Tammany Parish feasibility study. Sara Bradley's here. She'll go into it in a little more detail. Tonight's focus is really just going to be a presentation. Then we have a map set up in the back with some boards to kind of get ideas. That's really the intent of tonight, is to talk to the residents of the parish and let us know what's happening in your area, and then give us ideas that we can kind of build on for the next phases of the study. But we'll be in the back after the presentation. Please come talk to us. And without any further ado, Sara.
Thanks, Matt. Welcome, everyone. Appreciate you all taking time out tonight. We hear there's a planning meeting at 6:30, so we'll try to get through the presentation and let you all decide where you want to be. My name is Sara Bradley. I'm a senior project manager for the Corps of Engineers out of New Orleans, leading up this study. Just real quickly, I'd like the Corps to raise their hands, and maybe they're all kind of glommed together. So we've got planners, project managers, economists, folks in H&H, engineers, lots of folks from the Corps team. Happy to talk to you one-on-one in the back after the short presentation. We've got the state here, our non-federal sponsors, CPRA, up in the front. And I think there's few enough people. If y'all want to go around the room and introduce yourselves, we'd certainly love to hear who you are and your interest. Sir, would you like to start? Sure. It's fine to introduce your friend, yes. Wonderful, thank you, Henry. Okay.
Barry Brubacker and Neil Schaefer, and also 5 lots of the Lake Don Lancaster.
Neil Schaefer is doing a joint study with the Parish, the Levy District, and CPRA, and a three-way intergovernmental agreement where they just completed what is a conceptual alternative coastal master plan for St. Tammany Parish.
Thank you. Thanks.
We've shared with the Corps.
Yes, yes, sir. Thank you.
I'm Michael Wash, president, and also a candidate for Mayor Handel.
Great.
Sarah Pagonis, I'm with the Advocate.
I'm Joel Tillery.
Thanks.
I'm a resident and water resources engineer with the Planners Design Group.
Okay.
Ricky Galloway, Chief Davis Smith, civil engineer, also lifelong resident of Greenville.
Thank you for being here.
Lee Neer, I'm with the Corps of Engineers and the Waterways Department.
Okay.
I'm a resident from Mayor Handel.
Okay, wonderful. Sir?
Andrew Ingram with Waterway First Marine. I'm a resident here in Mandeville, Covington area. I've worked on a whole bunch of flood projects for the Corps of Engineers.
Wonderful. Sabrina?
I'm Sabrina Pierre, residential realtor.
Michael Pulaski, Mandeville City Council. Kelly Crella, running for City Council in Mandeville.
Thank you.
Lorraine Seaton, Mansfield City Council.
Thank you. I think I missed you over here. Are you CPRA?
Yeah.
Sorry, still getting used to everyone. Okay, and some more core folks over here. So appreciate, again, you all being here tonight. I'm really excited that you all made time in your day to come out here and visit with us. I'll start by saying, this is a kickoff meeting. We're about a month into a 3-year process, and we are already engaged with the levy board, the parish, and the state on all the existing information. We are by no means reinventing the wheel here. We know you've all done a lot of work, and a great deal of information has already been shared with us, and we look forward to working with all of you as we move forward. So I'll go through a quick agenda. We hit welcomes and introductions. I'll go through the purpose of the meeting, which Matt hit up front. I'll walk you through the authority, some of the ongoing coordination, and the overall schedule for the 3-year study. And then I'll turn over to Michelle Myers. She's a planner on the project, and she'll walk you through the core planning process and where we're headed with this study. So as Matt said, really we're here for 2 reasons. One, to let you know that the Corps is doing a study. It's a federal study, of course, that will be informed by all the local work that is being done and has been done in the past. And really the key here for tonight is to try to get your input. So like I said, we're about 30 days into this study, and we're here to hear from the experts, which is you, on flooding that you are experiencing, the sources of flooding, how much flooding, ideas you have for solutions that are going to help us shape our process and help us make some informed decisions to make sure we end up with a good product at the end of the day. So the authority for the project. So Congress there's two things that the Corps needs from Congress to do any type of study. The first one is authority, and that's essentially permission. That authority came out of the WIN Act of 2016. It did include language for flood risk management as well as ecosystem restoration. The second thing that the Corps needs from Congress before we do any work is appropriations, and that's funding. And that came out of the Bipartisan Budget Act of 2018. So that followed the Great Flood event in 2016 in Baton Rouge, and of course the hurricanes that swept the Gulf Coast. So Congress did give us the funding for the 2016 authority at that time. Essentially, the Corps, we got, I think, 5 studies about a year ago that came out of that Bipartisan Budget Act, and there was additional funding still at headquarters. So it's been about a year now, but that funding eventually did trickle down, and we've kicked off a 6th study for St. Tammany Parish, so very excited about that. A couple things I do want to note on this slide. The first thing is the Bipartisan Budget Act of 2018 limits us to flood risk management. So the 2016 authority said, Corps, go look at ecosystem restoration and flood risk management. But the funding authorization we have is going to limit us to flood risk management. So we're not going to be doing ecosystem restoration for the purposes of ecosystem restoration. We will look at natural and nature-based solutions. We can look at things like marsh creation, oyster reefs, but they need to produce a tangible benefit that we can relate back to flood risk management. So flood damage is prevented by the construction of marsh or an oyster reef. I hope that's clear. The other things I wanted to mention are this is fully federally funded. So it's a $3 million study. Typically our studies are 50-50 cost share with a local sponsor. The ones that came out of that Bipartisan Budget Act of 2018 are full federal funding. So the federal government is on the hook for that $3 million. I do want to mention the Corps revolutionized its planning process in about 2012 timeframe. I think we were pretty well known for being expensive and taking a long time to study things, and so we now operate in what we call a 3x3x3 environment. So again, 3 years, $3 million, and 3 levels of vertical integration to do the study. So I think the time and cost is pretty self-explanatory. The 3 levels of involvement means that when you're calling me at the district in New Orleans, I'm talking with our division office in Vicksburg, Mississippi, and headquarters office in Washington, D.C. all the time. We brief them quarterly. They're engaged in all the milestones. And so traditionally the Corps would kind of have this stepwise process. We would come up with recommendations. They would go to the next level. They would chop on it. It would keep going higher. But at this point, we all work as a team. And so there's really no surprises. It should be a seamless process to get through this 3-year plan and end up with the final recommendation. So I mentioned the coordination a little bit earlier. CPRA is the official non-federal sponsor for this study. They signed the feasibility cost share agreement in January on the 14th. But we absolutely know that there's a lot of stakeholder engagement and a lot of existing information out there. And so we have already been coordinating with the levee board and the parish in relation to the study. Of course, we have our typical government stakeholders that we always coordinate with. That's going to be your natural resource agencies. Excuse me. That's your Fish and Wildlife Service, EPA, NOAA, NIMS, the federally recognized tribes, state of Louisiana, so your DNR, Wildlife and Fisheries, again, the parish and levee district, and then the city officials as well. We do hold a lot of public meetings too, so really trying to get at that kind of landowner input as well as we go through this process. And so we're going to be taking all of that into account as we move forward. So this is just a kind of ugly slide that maps out for you the 3-year process. So we did execute the cost share agreement with the state of Louisiana in January. So we are where the big gold star is. We are just kicking off the study. In 90 days from the FCSA, we hold what's called an alternatives milestone meeting. And at that point, we brief our division and headquarters offices on kind of the array of alternatives that we looked at, and ideally a focused array. So we're going to try to get through some very early screening processes so that we're looking at maybe 10, 15, 20 alternatives and not 150. And so having all the information from the levee board, from the parish, from CPRA is really going to help us do that, and we really appreciate the value you bring to the team. So we'll have that big milestone meeting in April, and that's going to kind of set the tone for the rest of the study. In a year from now, we'll have what we call the tentatively selected plan milestone, and that's when the district recommends an alternative to move forward with. We will go out for public review. We'll do a decision document, that's called a feasibility report, and that's going to outline the planning process, all the alternatives we looked at, and how we came to this decision. And it's also going to include an environmental impact statement. And so that's a NEPA document, National Environmental Policy Act, and it's going to walk through the impacts of the environment, social, cultural, historic resources, and make that available for public comment and review. In July timeframe, we'll do what's called an agency decision milestone. That follows 4 levels of review. Again, the public review, technical reviews, policy reviews, and then we go back in front of our corporate board and say, okay, we think this is the plan. We heard this or that from the public, and we basically confirm our assumptions on that plan, or we go back to the drawing board on that. And then really the last year is spent doing feasibility level design of that selected plan. So we've got a year to figure out the plan, a year to really design it and develop costs and benefits for that plan, and then honestly the last year is kind of a lot of reviews at higher headquarters before we end up with a chief's report in January of 2023 that can be submitted to Congress. So when that chief's report goes to Congress, the onus is really on them at that point to give us authority and appropriations for construction. So just to be clear, this is just a study at this time. We don't have permission or funding to go to construction. But doing this work we're going to do in the next 3 years will hopefully tell a good story that we can sell to Congress in the hopes of getting that funding and that permission to do some work within the parish. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Michelle Myers to walk you through our planning process.
Hi, good evening, everyone. So as Sarah mentioned, we really have been collaborating with the other ongoing efforts. So we just wanted to make sure everybody knew that and didn't think we were starting over with this study at all. There is a very quick timeline before we get to that initial array that Sarah mentioned. And so between now and April, we really are ingesting all the information that has been developed from all these other studies, working very closely with the state, the parish, the levy board, the contractors to not reduplicate what's already been done. So we just want to make sure that everybody knows that, because we didn't want you to be like, oh my gosh, somebody else is going to study this again, like why? We are happy to be here in the game. You know, that we're excited that Congress saw the need for federal involvement here in this project. And, you know, there's a lot that needs to be done in St. Tammany from everything we're reading. So this is just another kind of piece of the pie to help everything fit together and move the parish further along. So as I mentioned, a tremendous amount of work has been done, but the Corps still has to do their own analysis to be able to go through our process and report up our chain. So where we are right now, we're in this initial planning phase, and between now and April 2020, ooh, I need to be louder. Okay. Between now and April 2020, which is just a few months away, I'll talk a little bit about what we'll be doing. With all that information and all the good data that we have received so far and what we know is still coming, we're looking at what the problems and opportunities are in the parish. We're looking at the existing conditions, and we're forecasting conditions. So if we did nothing, if the Corps didn't recommend a plan, what would the parish look like in the future? And then we're formulating those alternatives. After we formulate those alternatives and we have an array that we present up our chain to division and headquarters, and they agree, yes, this looks like a good set of plans for you to evaluate further. After that, we will go in more detail and evaluate and compare those before we pick our tentatively selected plan early next year. So what we need from you tonight to get through this process is we need information. So we know of about 30 different studies that have historically been done. We've cataloged all of those. We've looked in all of those. We have a list of about 170 different recommendations that have come out of those 30-something studies that we've looked at, but we know that not everything always made it into those reports. So if you know something that's happening in your community, please let us know. There's large maps in the back if you haven't seen them with Post-it notes. Feel free to go over there, circle things, scribble in the notes, you know, when you've seen flooding and where and how frequent it was, or if you didn't have flooding in 20 years in a certain location and all of a sudden somebody built something and now there's flooding, we want to know about it to make sure that we capture that in our analysis. And if you have any ideas on what could prevent future flooding, make sure you give that to us also. After the short presentation, the Corps folks and the CPRA folks will be all around the room, so feel free to talk to us. We'll jot down little notes. There's comment cards, and so if you want to make sure we capture something, make sure to put it on a comment card, because we'll try to take notes, but just to make sure we don't miss anything. If there's any other data or reports you think we might not have of the 30, please let us know, and we'll make sure to take a look at those as well. So our study area is all of St. Tammany Parish. That's a little bit different than some of the prior studies we've looked at. Some of them were mostly coastal, and so we're actually looking at coastal flooding, and we're looking at riverine flooding, and so we'll be combining all of those sources. So some of the problems that we've identified looking in the various documentation that we've had is the study area is prone to flood damage, storm, surge, waves, rainfall, and riverine. So that those are a lot of different types of damages caused by different things that we're trying to capture here. There's been an increased risk to people from these different events, increased risk to people's property, critical infrastructure, including the interstates. There's been economic loss from these different flooding events, increased risk to historic structures. This one here, let me go back. We know that the ecological habitat is being lost, and that is kind of natural resiliency and protection for some flood. So we want to see how we could incorporate that or minimize the loss of that through the project. Sea level rise and subsidence are expected to continue, which will increase flood risk. And we've had increased development in the parish, which has led to increased flooding. Some of the opportunities we're trying to address through this study are decreasing the risk to human life, reducing economic damages, optimizing water storage and conveyance in the parish, increasing the reliability of the transportation corridors, including I-10, I-12, I-59. Some of those have been flooded recently. Reduce the loss of that habitat. That's a natural protection for some of these flooding. We want to enhance public education and awareness on flood risk, and we want to try to develop robust alternatives or projects that could handle the increased sea level rise and subsidence that are projected in the future. So the objectives kind of sum up what we saw in the problems and opportunities. We want to reduce the public health, reduce the flood damages, reduce the interruption to the transportation corridor, increase community resiliency before and after, and increase the resiliency of those coastal and inland habitats that act to reduce those flood damages. And so to do these, we would measure things such as annual economic damages from storms, the percent of populations that are impacted, flood frequency, duration in certain areas, and some of the wave impacts that we're seeing. So for the core planning process, there's certain things that we have that constrain our planning. One of them that we have seen so far is that projects must meet a minimum flow to be considered for our planning process. So I mentioned that we had a list of 170 or so projects that have been previously proposed. We're looking at those at the moment to see which of those meet a minimum flow. They have to be above 800 cubic feet per second for us to be able to consider them and for them not to be a local drainage. And so just keep that in mind, that we're trying to look at a little bit of a larger scale project. And so some of the small projects might not be able to fit in this study. We're trying to minimize negative impacts to threatened and endangered species and critical habitat, avoid locating projects on lands known to have hazardous, toxic, and radioactive waste, and minimize impacts to established recreational areas. So in part of our process, we have to come up with a baseline. We call this the no action alternative, or the future without project condition. And so this is our projected idea of what the most likely condition would be if no actions were taken as part of the project. So in this, we consider the current construction projects that others are doing. So if the parish is in the middle of planning and designing something that we know is going to be put into place, we'll consider that is there in the future. But we also look at what isn't there. So without future action by this project, we would expect some increased flood risk, increased storm damages, continued sea level rise, subsidence, rainfall, all expected to continue into the future, causing more flooding. So the next few slides are just some of the data that we've been looking at and compiling, trying to figure out exactly where the problem areas are and where to focus our attention. So we've looked at land coverage in the parish, what percentage of the parish is developed versus how much is agricultural versus, undeveloped land. We've looked at the structure inventory for the parish. So there's about 100,000 structures within the study area. 90% are residential, about 90% are residential, 10% are commercial. You can see there's a lot of dots and structures throughout the parish. We've gotten from St. Tammany Parish some problem areas that they've seen drainage issues in. So we've kind of overlaid the structures with the drainage area issues to see where we might need to focus our attention. So where are there issues from coastal flooding? Where are there issues that are more riverine or inland rainfall problems? And so we're taking all this into account. As you can see here, there's kind of issues, drainage problems all over the map. We have some in the Defuncta, Mandeville, Covington, Lacombe, Slidell. We even have some up north here around Sun from the Bogachita. So this is keeping we're still looking around the whole parish. We've looked at the FEMA flood claim statistics. So we know that not everybody's insured, but for those that are insured and have put in claims, we wanted to see where those claims were coming, and Slidell has the most claims, followed by Mandeville, Covington, and Madisonville. And so all of these different pieces of information are just helping us to narrow down where we might need to look and to develop alternatives. So these are the types of things we might be looking at under the study. So these are not everything, just examples. So we could be looking at structural alternatives, which are levees, flood walls, detention basins, floodgates, diversion canals, improvements to existing bridges and channels. We could be looking at non-structural things such as elevating homes, flood-proofing commercial buildings, things engineering with nature. So that's what Sarah was mentioning. We can't do ecosystem restoration just to do ecosystem restoration, but if we can show that marsh creation in a certain area will reduce flood benefits, we want to take a look at that. And we could look at combinations of all of those things. In the end, that recommended plan could be one big project, or it could be a combination of many small projects in different parts of the parish. So just to recap, did we miss anything? You saw the problems that we think we're trying to address, some of the problems areas that we're trying to address. If you didn't see something or an issue that's happening, please let us know. We're here. We want to get all the information we can while we're early in the study so that we can make sure to consider it moving on. And if you have any follow-up or anything you can't think of tonight, we have some ways for you to get in contact with us. So you could send us an email or visit the website, and we'll definitely incorporate those things as we move forward.
So I think it's right at 6:30. We were trying to get this wrapped up before then so everybody could go across the street if you wanted to. If you're interested in following the study, there's the web address for it. Everything that's related to this study will be put on that website. If you go to the mvn.usace.army.mil, there's a button at the top that says studies, and you can navigate down to the St. Tammany Parish one. Also, that email address, and if you came in late and you didn't sign in and you want to be kept up to date when we have meetings and things like that, make sure you sign in so we have email addresses and things of that nature. But that wraps up our presentation. If you want to hang around and talk to us, we'll be back in the back at the maps, or come talk to any of our lovely core personnel. So thank you.